to Lead, Manage, and Thrive, where we talk leadership, systems, and scaling with intention. I'm Joe Carter, founder of the Twin Crane Group and partner with the franchise consulting company. And I advise growth stage founders building businesses that are worth buying. Today's guest is Dr. David Lipman, chiropractic physician and founder of the Physical Evidence Bio-Optimization Center in Boca Raton. He's worked with elite performers, pro athletes, and high output executives to restore vitality and extend runway. And he's here to break down how the Superhuman Protocol, a combination of PEMF, oxygen therapy, and red light, is giving founders their edge back. Whether you're burning out or want to bulletproof your performance, stay tuned. But before I turn it over to Doc, this episode is brought to you by DFW Pierce Bespoke, the go-to clothier for founders and executives who want to look as sharp as they think. If you've built a business, now go build the look. Pierce Bespoke will craft custom pieces for leaders who understand that presence is a part of performance. So first and foremost, Dr. Lipman, thank you for being on and welcome to the show.
Thanks for inviting me on and having me.
Yes, sir. Let's dive right in. What exactly is the Superhuman Protocol and why is it catching fire among entrepreneurs and executives?
So, as you mentioned in the introduction, it's a three-step process. It's a pulsed electromagnetic field, it's exercise with oxygen therapy, and then photobiomodulation, better known as red light, and also near infrared. And I'll go into the specifics of that as we get to each section. So each therapy by itself is a great standalone. Each thing does some really positive things for the body. But Jason Tabot from Da Vinci Medical had accidentally found, by combining these three in this order, that it had a supercharging effect on our cellular function. And, just to kind of frame that out a little more, cell function or cell energy production is what drives everything. In fact, anything that goes wrong in us, it starts at the cellular level, and it starts with the reduction of energy production. And, because we've actually identified over 32,000 diseases in humans, that we've provided a diagnosis for. And the one common denominator in every one of those diseases is a loss of energy production at the cell level. So the cell, the tissue it's a part of, and the organ system that tissue is a part of is going to start failing at some point in some way because of that lack of energy. So when I learned that, it made me see that we really have one issue with 32,000 plus symptoms. And the issue is a loss of energy production at the cell level. So if we just focus on that, we should have a very positive downline effect in correcting these things that we're calling diseases. So what I discovered in using the Superhuman Protocol in this three-step process is that it's a really great way to optimize that energy production at the cell level. So let's just kind of dive in at first to step one, pulsed electromagnetic field, or PEMF. So the premise here is that all of our physiology is driven by plus and minus charges. The way our cells bring nutrients in from our bloodstream, vitamins and minerals and other nutrients inside the cell through the membrane, and the way we remove waste products from cell metabolisms goes through the membrane. That's a plus and minus charge exchange. Our nervous system, it fires because of plus and minus charges exchanging, and our muscular system. And the way we carry oxygen from our lungs to our tissues by red blood cells, that has a lot to do with plus and minus charges, or polarity. So we're essentially, or our bodies are essentially, magnetic beings, our electromagnetic biospheres. And the Earth has been our battery for centuries. The Earth is a low-level electromagnetic field because of gravity and the way it's been set up by our Creator. So we've gotten the benefit of living on the Earth and having this physiology constantly recharged on a daily basis. Unfortunately, in this contemporary world now, we live on these concrete slabs, those of us that live in cities and suburbs, and we wear rubber soles, many of us. So we're not getting that constant recharge by the Earth every day unless we're walking barefoot on the ground, on the dirt, the grass, the sand at the beach, wherever it is. So, most of us in this modern world kind of live a lot inside and we're not getting out enough. So that's the part where we're getting the deficit of not getting the ground to continually renew us on that basis. The other complicating factor is all the electrical grid around us and our wireless networks and our 5G and our devices that have Bluetooth. They emit these high frequency electromagnetic fields that completely disturb our normal functioning in the way our plus and minus charges are doing all our physiological processes. So it's sort of twofold there. So with the pulsed electromagnetic field as a therapeutic process, we're starting off from the beginning in optimizing that body's polarity again. So it's going to help all that physiology work better. Our cells are going to communicate better together, but it really is going to help prep our red blood cells to carry that oxygen from our lungs into our tissues, because the ultimate end game here is to optimize oxygen therapy or oxygen into the cells to make energy, because oxygen presence in the cell is how we optimize energy production. Because if our cells, as an example, make energy without oxygen present, they're only running at about 2 horsepower. It's not horsepower, but think of it that way. But when oxygen is present, it's running at 36 horsepower. So the difference between running a 2 horsepower cell and a 36 horsepower cell is really what we're talking about in how the Superhuman Protocol overall fuels us, but starting with PEMF, how that piece fits into the overall pop. So we're going to, again, focus on in step 1, getting that polarity solid so our red blood cells are really geared up to carry oxygen. So that's step 1. Do you have any questions or anything that you wanted to ask about that part? No?
Not about that part. You're blowing my mind so far. 2 to 36 horsepower is a pretty big jump.
It is. I mean, that's the superhuman effect. So now being prepped at that higher level of physiological function, plus and minus charges, we're now ready for step 2, which is exercise with oxygen therapy, or EWOT for short. So we have, and the exercise really isn't important. We have a Bowflex stepper where there's upper and lower body being engaged. The idea here is to get the heart rate up. But what we're doing during this time is we're doing exercise wearing a mask that's connected to a cylinder that has 98% oxygen purity. We typically only breathe in about 21% in our room air or our atmosphere, but this is 98%. So during exercise, when we're creating the need for more more oxygen to be drawn into the body, we're actually providing it at, almost 5 times the amount. We don't actually need that much, but all the compressors that have been created out there, they go to 98%. So we're actually getting 98% oxygen concentration while exercising. And so you only need to exercise for about 10 minutes. You'll do 2 or 3 sprints in that time, because when you do sprints, you create oxygen debt. So you're creating an increased pressure of oxygen coming into the lungs and into the tissues to repay that debt. But now, of course, we're repaying it with 98% oxygen concentration instead of only 21. And one of the unique things we see each and every time is, like, typically when we do sprints, the first couple are your best and you start to lose gas after that. Well, it's the opposite with EWOT, because you're actually getting better recovery with each sprint, more oxygenation in your tissues. The oxygen presence is going to help dissociate the lactic acid that builds up, like in your legs or your arms, into carbon dioxide and water at a much higher level than we typically do. And plus, because we're getting all that oxygen to our tissues to recover from that sprint, we're getting back to a normal resting heart rate much faster. So the recovery on EWOT actually gets better and better and better. And we can judge or measure the intensity of each sprint. And with everybody, it always gets better and better because it actually gets easier. So that's one of the first things I noticed the very first day I did it myself. And so, again, step 1, we've prepped our red blood cells to optimize oxygen carrying capability. Step 2, we provide that oxygen during exercise, which is going to upgrade the body's need for it in this higher concentration. And this leads us to step 3 with the red light or the photobiomodulation, where we're going to actually drive that oxygen into the cell, displacing any free radicals that might be damaging that cell and preventing oxygen from coming in. And again, the optimized energy production is because oxygen is present. So now we have so much more oxygen in our tissues than we typically walk around with. Now that the red light is driving that into the cell, so our mitochondria is upgrading that ATP production again from 2 horsepower to 36 horsepower. That downline effect, physically, physiologically, in terms of how our minds are functioning, all of it, all of our processes are working so much better. Even sleep, mood, all those things are at a much higher level because we just don't realize how much more energy we can be producing in our cells to help us function when oxygen is present in those kinds of concentrations. Most of us think, well, we're breathing, we're still alive, we're good. Not even close. When I started doing Superhuman, Joe, I realized that I've got a 16-cylinder engine and I've only been firing about 4 of them. That's the way it makes you feel. So that's the 3-step process. That's why it works, and that's how it works, again, stacking these 3 therapies together.
I love it, and you just basically gave me a master class on things I didn't even know, but conceptually makes total sense, right? Like I'm not utilizing the things that are kind of God-given around the earth, and so I need to supplement it some better way, and certainly a lack of oxygen doesn't help. And then the ability to kind of recuperate after that. As I've talked to several people that either do chiropractic work or some version of some of the things that you offer, the overarching theme that I hear is it's almost like a reactive care. You get injured, you need chiropractic, or you need physical therapy, or you need all these other things. But please correct me if I'm wrong. It sounds like this is something that's more preventative than reactive. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, completely. And therein lies the challenge too, from a business standpoint, because because I started as a chiropractic practice, and even the chiropractic itself that I started in the 1980s has evolved a lot. The modalities I use and the way I integrate several technologies together to create this, what I call this body re-engineering process, to help from a chiropractic standpoint really resolve the issues that people come in with, because most people either they associate the pain they have with a certain piece of structural damage in their bodies, or they're trying to understand, the presence of pain versus not being in pain and how that relates to how well they're doing. And so what I try to do is educate people that pain is usually a downline effect of some kind of dysfunction. It's really not the herniated disc, and it's not the torn labrum or the torn meniscus in the knee. Those things can still exist, but you can still be pain-free and functional. So my process is trying to get the body's functional aspect of how it's bearing weight and moving to be optimized. So even with those structural components being worn down, arthritis, stenosis, all of those things, I have learned that by investing as an individual in the body that you're walking around with and making sure you do certain things to support that functionality, that you can be pain-free and functional despite all those structural injuries that people always associate with, having their, quote unquote problem. So that as it applies to the chiropractic piece, I try to get them from that reactive care into something that's more maintainable and an investment for them to maintain that. So chiropractic as a maintenance thing can just help re-engineer that body maybe once a month, twice a month, depending on the individual. But it also depends on how much they support that process on the outside. Now, when it comes to Superhuman Protocol and some of the other things that we do here, we're looking at the different layers of human physiology and how we function biochemically, and give people a blueprint of themselves, because we all, as an example, we process nutrients in our body differently because of perhaps some variants that we've inherited from one or both parents. And so genetically that can affect things. And it's not like your genes determine what happens, but understanding what deficits you might have can allow you to have workarounds. But again, you have to have that preventive mindset in terms of investing in what I call the incline and continued incline of your health, your performance, your strength, as opposed to managing the decline, which is kind of what we've all been doing, based on the model we've been living through. So I do try to encourage people to think of things proactively, because that's the best healthcare system we can have, which is really a self-care system, but it comes from people being educated about their own physiology, biochemistry, and how it works, and being willing to do certain things as part of lifestyle, using certain technologies, modalities. Some people get it for their homes to make sure they do it on a regular basis, or they come to the office here and use them. But it is, as you said, in this question, it is a much more proactive mindset as opposed to just being reactive. So the challenge is to get us from where we've been more reactive, like, because most people live their lives, and if something breaks, they go to their doctor hoping that it's going to be fixed. But we know that doesn't work. So it just comes from learning more about ourselves and what we can do lifestyle-wise to live a much more pain-free, invigorating life, even as we get older. I'm 65, and I'm as strong, if not stronger, than I was in my 30s. My energy's great. I sleep great. My mind's clear. But apparently, as I come here and see a lot of my patients that come in, a lot of them are 20 years younger than me, and they don't feel as good as I do. But I know I wouldn't feel as good as I did either if I wasn't investing in this type of, proactive mentality.
Definitely. And I know you mentioned, like, once they get to a place, it's like a once to twice a month type occurrence that they need to come back to continue on. But how long before they actually see changes? If a client showed up today and did their initial consultation with you, how long until they kind of start feeling better or feeling towards the process of getting better, I guess?
Right. So it does depend a certain amount on the patient themselves in terms of, I'll use age only because when people are younger, their body's ability to regenerate and heal is better. Unless we're really supporting ourselves lifestyle wise, that ability will tend to diminish over time unless we really put a lot of focus into it. The way we work here is that the modalities that I choose to use, and I don't take health insurance because health insurance is really behind in covering the types of technologies that can really speed up that healing process and getting people, back into a pain-free existence faster. So I'm able to, because I have a cash-based practice, to incorporate a lot of these cutting-edge technologies that really speed up the process. So a typical, and I'll say typical, when I say typical, I'll say 75, 80% of the people that come in with either an acute or something that's chronic, with one visit, they're going to notice anywhere from a 25 to a 50% improvement in their perceived ability to function. I make it a point to let people know that I don't want you to focus on the pain that you have. I want you to focus on your function, meaning how easily can you get up from a chair to standing position? Or how about getting out of the car? Or how about walking? Like, I want you to focus on those things, because if you're just focused on your pain, you're not really understanding what's happening, because we don't do pain management. Pain isn't the thing. It's a neurological stimulation to specific fibers of our nervous system that tell our brain something's wrong. Doesn't tell us what's wrong. It just lets us know something's wrong. So it interferes with the way we function, the way we bear weight and move. So my goal is to unwind or re-engineer that dysfunction to help restore an individual's ability to just, move through life every day. And then we'll worry about working out and doing the, sports and things like that, which many people, want to get back to. And I always encourage that. But we want to make sure they can get through their daily activities first, pain-free and functionally. So the typical person, as I said, will get a change within one visit. Sometimes within 2 visits, we can be closer to 80%. Sometimes it takes a little bit more. But the better condition somebody's in to start with, Joe, the better ability I have to help them bounce back to that functionality. When it's somebody that's been sedentary for a long time, they don't have the foundational strength to support what I'm doing here, because unfortunately their body's been held together by spasm and weakness and dysfunction. And because they haven't had pain during much of that time, they think they've been fine, not realizing that the pain is just finally showing up because one thing finally set it off, but the condition had been there for a long time. So that's where it gets harder to get somebody to bounce back as quickly. But people that I don't have to first encourage to exercise or work out and be in a conditioning kind of mentality, they get better a lot faster. I've got a lot of people from the gym that I work out. They know me and they come to see me with injuries. I'm able to show them exactly what they need to do in the gym to reinforce the changes we're making here, because there's always weakness and imbalance when there's pain, always. So making sure they get that, as well as the process here. So it really comes down to that individual's investment in themselves, what their lifestyle has been. But we do get results fairly quickly compared to the way I used to practice, where we're just kind of doing more of a passive therapy and adjustment on the spine, and they're out the door. Do so much more now to really get those results.
So it sounds like you're also helping your clients kind of change their mindset, really, in reference to their own body. And I can imagine having dealt with many people where I had to help through a mindset shift, whether in business world or somewhere else. That can be challenging for some people to adjust a mindset that has been ingrained in them for a very long time, and they can almost be skeptical. So I can only imagine there's likely skeptics in reference to this as well. So how would you address the kind of prototypical skeptic that might say something like, this sounds too good to be true type thing?
Well, I always put the responsibility on them, and I start with myself. I had a lot of injuries at a very young age. My shoulder was dislocated when I was 5. When I was 15, I had a motorcycle accident. I broke my neck in 2 places. About 20 years ago, I ruptured a disc in my low back and I lost function in my right leg. But I've never had surgery. Because I started working out when I was 10 years old, I was influenced by an older kid next door. His dad was into martial arts, and he taught me how by doing things to your body conditioning wise, you can make your body stronger. And what you ate would also support that process, or could work against you depending on what your choices were. So I got off of Captain Crunch and Wonder Bread that my mom had in the house and started eating real food. But the concept, again, being that our bodies have very specific ways of functioning, and we could do things to improve, strength, stability, and those types of things. I relate it back to myself, my own injuries, that I've had all these pretty significant injuries, but at 65, I'm pain-free and functional, and that's without any kind of surgery. I still have herniated discs, I still have spinal stenosis, arthritis, torn labrum, but I don't have any pain, and I'm very functional. So I say, look, I'm not unique in that way, but I've just been understanding what I need to do to support, this pain-free and functional living. And what I can do is share with you what I've learned. The treatment is something that I've done, for just about 40 years, so I know how effective it is. But the onus is on you, Joe. Joe, you're the one that's walking around that body every day. What you do to that body every day is going to have far more impact than anything I or any other practitioner can do. So that's the way I frame it out. And I've had people to say, look, if you're not willing to do this, we probably shouldn't start this process, because your body's been in this dysfunctional stability. And unless you're willing to do some kind of change to support the functional stability we're trying to create, it's not going to happen. And, I don't want to make you feel like, you wasted your money or that kind of thing. So I'm just straight up with them. And only from an honesty standpoint, because you do this long enough, and especially when you live it yourself, you know what you need to do. I know what I have to do, 6 days a week to support myself in the gym, the strength I need, because I'm big bending over and picking up people. Some of them are, 275-pound guys, and I have to do that effectively for them and also not to hurt myself. So I realize how strong we need to be, for my kind of work. But I believe every one of us needs to be strong for everyday lives, because most of the stuff that happens to us in everyday life is, from normal movements that, we just got too weak to execute properly. So those are the kinds of conversations I have. Super, honest, and make sure that they're the right person, because I want results for them, and I want results for me too. I don't want to compromise anybody's health or my reputation and what I'm doing here either, based on my beliefs.
100% agree with that. So for the listeners that are out there and are feeling some of the things that you're talking about, feeling that disconnection, they're dragging through the course of their day. Outside of showing up at your office, what would be one thing that they could change today to begin to make the step towards optimization?
Well, there's a lot of things that people can do. First of all, really trying to minimize screen time and exposure to electromagnetic fields, or high frequency electromagnetic fields, or EMFs. If depending on where you live, if you can actually get your feet on the ground each and every day, get sunlight. Sunlight is not dangerous like they told us. It's actually really important for a lot of our physiological processes to happen. and also getting enough oxygen. And there's simple, breathing exercises like Wim Hof and those kinds of things to just get more oxygen than we're typically getting, and getting out into fresh air, because room air doesn't have the same quality as the fresh air, even with pollution out there. So that's doing a superhuman type thing with grounding, oxygen, and getting it in, and getting sunlight will do a lot to do a similar thing to what superhuman is. And as you pointed out, we're taking three aspects of creation, the earth, the air, and the light. And those three things are basically what makes superhuman what it is. But it's not an original design. The original design is right here outside. And so, we could all benefit. And it's funny, we live in Boca Raton, Florida. There's an east side of town where the ocean is. Then there's a west side of town, which tends to have more of the communities with golf courses and things like that. And there's definitely a difference of people that live on the east side of town. They tend to be outside more. They're by the beach. They'll tend to have walks on the beach more often because it's very convenient. And so their energy is different. They look healthier. This is an observation that I've made in seeing people that come to me from the east side of town versus the west side of town. So it's interesting because most of the people on the west side, and again, it's a generalization, spend more time indoors than outdoors, unless they're playing golf or they have kids that are doing sports, which of course helps to get them outside. But people that are empty nesters, they really have to make it a point to get outside into that environment, so to benefit from how nature supports our bodies, our physiology. So those are certain just easy things to do. The other thing that most people don't realize is the importance of hydration. Even just drinking water is not enough. We need electrolytes. Electrolytes is what helps to get the water inside our cells, because that's where the water is needed. It's not just a question of drinking the water to get it into your tissues. It must get inside the cells to do what it does. And you need electrolytes for that water to be drawn into the cells. So a lot of us are suffering from electrolyte, imbalances or deficiencies, because most of the topsoil that we're getting food grown in doesn't have the mineral content anymore. Many of us are drinking things that actually cause some of those electrolytes in our bodies to kind of leach out. We don't really drink well water anymore, which has its own minerals because it's natural. So bottled water doesn't typically have that. So a lot of people are walking around dehydrated. It will affect energy because it's affecting cell function and cell energy production. So making sure that you get enough electrolytes and water on a daily basis is another thing that can actually be a game changer for some people, because a lot of people are suffering from just that very fact, dehydration. And the general rule is that if you take about half of your body weight in ounces, so if you weigh 100 pounds, you need to be drinking 50 ounces a day with electrolytes. Obviously, if you're exercising on top of that, you might want to add 20% to that. So that's that half your body weight in ounces is just sort of to exist every day. But increasing any kind of activity would require a larger amount. And I say about 20% is about, because that's what I do, and it absolutely works. So that's another thing that's really important. Then there's things that people can do even without coming in my office. We have certain tests that we could perform. We could perform tests on how well their body is processing nutrients, and look, not in their bloodstream, but actually inside their cells, to see what is their nutrition content, because people don't realize it, but all the nutrients that we need, vitamins and minerals, people know we need them, but they don't really know what function they perform. Well, it's all inside the cell that it performs these functions. So when we test nutrients, we don't test the bloodstream. We test inside the cell. So you're looking at about the last 6 months of how your cells have been doing. Because when we look at a blood test that a doctor would typically get us, look at our magnesium or potassium or vitamin D levels, we're looking at the last 3 days of our lives. We're not looking beyond that, because that's not where the nutrients are doing their work. But when we look inside the cell, we're looking at about 6 months worth. And that's where you really can have a better picture of how well your nutrition and or supplements are supplying your body's needs. So I love metrics because numbers don't lie. And the cool part about these numbers is that they will correspond to the way people feel. And a lot of times people are walking around, with brain fog and lethargicness, like, middle of the afternoon, because they don't have the nutrients they need for their body to function at that optimal level. So those are two really important things that people can do without having to necessarily walk into my office. And the final thing, which I think we really reference back to the beginning of this whole conversation, is how well are our mitochondria making energy in our cells? And there's a test that actually can determine how well your mitochondria are doing it, because let's say nutritionally you're at a deficit, your mitochondrial membrane might be leaking out protons when it's making energy. So your engine's revving, but it's not really going anywhere. So by identifying what's the deficit in a mitochondrial membrane and what nutrients you might be lacking, that can help build that back, which is going to help, again, upgrade energy production. Or we can look at how well the mitochondria within a given cell are working together. You know, how many pistons are firing together, or is the timing off? So those things, I'm relating it to a car, but it's a very good metaphor, because we have multiple mitochondria in any given cell, and if they're not working together timing wise, it's going to cause dysfunction in that energy production cycle. Or are people really wrought with free radical damage and oxidative stress? That's another thing that will reduce energy production. So maybe at rest they're doing okay, but when they increase stress of any kind, physical or emotional, they're not doing as well. So identifying these deficits and then having protocols to fix them at the cell level is a really big one. And to me, that's one of the most important tests anybody can take. So these are some of the things people can do without physically walking in here to get some of that information about themselves.
Boom, there you go. Free advice and stuff that virtually everyone can go execute. Go outside, get in the sun, do a little bit of exercise, drink electrolytes, not just water, get some basic blood tests done to understand where your body is today. So that free advice and a masterclass in reference to biooptimization. This has been gold, Dr. Lipman. If there is a listener, or if they know somebody, whatever, that would need your service, how do they reach out to you and your team to learn more about it?
Well, we have an online form fill. It's at physicalevidenceconnect.com, Physical Evidence Connect. So you can provide your information. There's a drop-down menu if you have specific questions about any of the things we might have spoken about, but there's also a little custom box where you can go in and put any particular questions. And if there's anything I don't know, many times I'll refer them to somebody that might be much better at that than I am. So I like to be a resource, whether it's the information I can provide directly or send people to somebody that might be focused more on that. And so to me, that's still doing my job. So that's one way to get us. We're also, we're changing because we're rebranding. So we have been Boca Raton Chiropractor on Instagram. So you can obviously follow us and DM us there. And but Physical Evidence, Boca Raton, Dr. David Lipman, there's many ways to reach us, but physicalevidenceconnect.com is an easy one.
Fantastic. And if you didn't catch it, just scroll down in the commentary. I'll be sure to include all of those links to the website, the forum, the Instagram, all that stuff, so you can reach out directly to Dr. Lipman and his team to get all your questions answered. Obviously, you've given us a tremendous amount of free advice today in reference to just some basic things that we can do, and then how we can leverage you to go superhuman. This has been not just necessarily like treating symptoms. To your point earlier, it's about restoring them back to what was originally intended their body to be. And that's what ultimately matters most, in my opinion. So I can't thank you enough for taking time. I know you're a super busy guy. So thank you for being on for us and our audience. We sincerely appreciate you, sir.
My pleasure, Joe. Thanks for having me on. And I really love to have opportunities like this to share this information, because it's of no value if I just have it for myself. The key is sharing it so many people can benefit from it, and they just need to know more about how their bodies function. They need to be their own primary care docs with more information to know how to conduct themselves to give them the best chance of feeling good. And again, that's about investing in that incline of your health and well-being instead of just managing the decline.
Couldn't agree more. When you feel good and you look good, you play good, you execute good. So it's hard to do the second two of those without the first two, and you're certainly helping really the first two not only get to a place of equality, but get to a place of optimization. So again, thank you so much. Thank you to our audience. I appreciate you. Until next time, continue to get out there, lead with clarity, build with strategy, and thrive on purpose. Thank you, everyone. Have a fantastic rest of your day.